is identified as the world, as nature, as the creation. And St. Maximus the Confessor, already as a distant as the 7th century, in the 600s, and it doesn't seem that St. Maximus the Confessor is aware of the early Christian tradition that kind of seems to have gone mainly through Syria. And yet, even so, in his reflection on the meaning of the two trees, he comes to see that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil must be the world, the creation. And in coming to that conclusion, whether or not he's aware of the Syriac tradition in which this is found, he's of one mind with the Syriac tradition. So when Adam and Eve eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to what would that correspond in the history of Israel? What act in the people of Israel would that correspond to, would you say?
The golden calf.
Which was an idol.
Yeah.
So that the eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would correspond to idolatry. So when Israel, with the command of God, you shall have no other gods before you, him alone shall you worship. And yet, what do? They start worshiping the idols. And they even to the point that they bring the idols of their neighbors into the temple that is dedicated to their God, even into the holy place. So there you have the correspondence. There you have Israel breaking the commandment in the same way that Adam and Eve broke the commandment. And the breaking of the commandment is in effect idolatry. You see in the prophets that the root, I would say that you would look at the prophets to see that the root of evil, the root of death is idolatry. Now St. Paul calls it covetousness, but he says in his what does he say? I think it's in Romans chapter 7. It might be in another place, that he might even say it in a couple of places. He says he says that covetousness, which is the law of sin, is covetousness, which is idolatry. So he's likening covetousness with idolatry. He's putting the two together. Well, in another place in the Holy Scriptures, it says that avarice, the love of money, is the root of all evil. So now you've got another layer, another element to this root of all evil. And St. Ephrem of Syria, yes, would say that greed is the root of all evil. But that's an English translation. The English translation says greed. You wonder what the Syriac is. And you wonder if the Syriac could be translated also as covetousness. I don't know. But anyhow, you've got greed from St. Ephrem of Syria. The prophets were saying they call it idolatry. St. Paul the Apostle calls it covetousness. St. Maximus the Confessor calls it self-love. So that this is here we have a full picture. Pick the word that speaks the most to you. And that is the root of all evil. And that is idolatry. And with the idolatry, with the breaking of the commandment, the prophets come to Israel. I mean, just like God comes to Adam and Eve, and there's this interrogation, the Holy Fathers, when they reflect upon God's interrogation of Adam and Eve, they see it as God's mercy, giving them every chance to repent, every chance to confess, to acknowledge what they have done, and to ask forgiveness. But they don't. They don't. They steel themselves in their self-love and their pride or whatever, their shame, and they will not admit it. And so God finally takes them out. Well, the prophets come to Israel again and again and again, and what are they telling the people of Israel? Stop worshiping the idols, right? Otherwise, some bad things are going to happen. Now, in Ezekiel, the message is that Ezekiel portrays God as this exasperated husband who's finally had it with his murderous wife, Israel. And so the husband says to the wife, okay, you want to go after your lovers? Go. You can have them. And see how they treat you. What is this, Ezekiel chapter 16 or 17? And see how they treat you. So the lovers, of course, are the other nations. And it's in Ezekiel, the sense is that it's not God so much that's punishing Israel, as it is that Israel, that he's giving Israel what she wants. And she wants the idols. Okay, you're going to have them. See what they do. See how life is with the idols. And of course, Israel is expelled from the promised land. You could even say that the nation of Israel is destroyed. First the northern kingdom, then the southern kingdom. But the Assyrians come in and take the northern kingdom, the Babylonians come in and take the southern kingdom. And the nation of Israel is no more. They go into exile. And the Holy Land is defiled by pagan peoples with their pagan gods, with their idols. And the nation of Israel, they're no more. They're no more. Then we move from there. I'm talking very broad strokes now. We move from there into the New Testament period. And in the church, think carefully. In the church, at what point would you say that the New Testament dawns? With that word I just gave that word. At what point would you say that the New Testament dawns?
You mean which feast day?
The resurrection.
Nope. I said dawns. So that's the key. That's the clue. No.
You mean
That's a
the
good guess.
nativity of the Theotokos?
Yes, the nativity of the Theotokos is when the New Testament dawns. Remember we say of her birth, something about the light has dawned because the temple has come. The temple is here. Now this is where it becomes very theologically fascinating, because I just said, where would you say that the New Testament dawns? Or another way would be to say it would be to say, at what point does the New Testament begin? In other words, what is the arche? What is the beginning of the New Testament? It would be the Theotokos. She would be the arche, the beginning of the New Testament. Why? Because she's the temple. She's the temple. And in her, God the Word begins to be as the new Adam. So here's the new creation. And the reason this is all fascinating is because now, you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And you go to John chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. So suddenly, in the beginning, in the temple, God made heaven and earth. Remember that in an ancient rabbinic tradition, an understanding of the story of the creation, the day one, remember the beginning here, that all of this takes place, or I should say there's a corollary between the creation and the temple, and the building of the temple. So that the creation of the world on day one corresponds to the construction, if you will, of the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies, of course, God dwells. So in the Holy of Holies, in the temple, in the Theotokos, God made the heavens and the earth. And it was in this, when I was ruminating on these kind of thoughts, that we came to the feast of the Theotokos Nativity, parents, Joachim and Anna, are called in one of the odes for the Matin service, the authors of creation. The authors of creation. And immediately, as soon as I read that, as soon as I saw that, I immediately thought of Genesis 1:1, and it became clear that, what I saw was that, suddenly, this is a there's a theological level here. There's a spiritual level underneath here. It's not just this dry, linear, scientific account, historical account of the creation. It's not that at all. It's a theological account of the creation, which means that our linear, mathematical way of thinking has to be put to death. We have to learn a completely new way of thinking, in which we begin to read this theologically. We begin to read it spiritually, so that this is a theological icon, if you will, that's expressing the deep mystery of the creation beginning, coming to be, not in some impersonal, point of time, according to the laws of physics and this Big Bang, but in the personal mystery of love, love. Joachim and Anna, in obedience to God, out of love for God. And in that obedience, giving birth to the temple, to the Theotokos, bringing forth the temple. The arche, she's the arche. I should say she's one aspect of the arche, because as I'm thinking on this, I'm beginning to think that the arche, the beginning, is what's the word? It's multifaceted. You can't just identify the beginning with one thing. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. You see the picture. God is in the beginning. God is in the beginning. And it's in the beginning that God is creating the heavens and the earth. Suddenly, so now you begin to think, I begin to think that maybe I'm crazy, I understand, I could be loopy,
No, you're not. The other thing I thought of just when you said that?
Thank you, Barbara. Wait, did you get that?
You said how things were void.
Yes.
Joachim and Anna were void of a child.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful, yes.
Another parallel.
Yes. But you begin to think, okay, throughout the history of the Bible, throughout the account of the Bible, are there other places? God, where does God, what is it that God is in, where this kind of act of creation begins? Well, Genesis 1:1, he's in the beginning, but in the rabbinic tradition, the beginning that he's in is the Holy of Holies, the temple. Well, he's in the Virgin. He's in the womb of the Virgin. What do we say? He made her womb more spacious than the heavens. Her body he made into a throne. But we also see him in the